speed, security, and portability. What else could you ask for in a network? Reliability, of course. With GL.iNet Beryl AX, you get all four of those, and in today's video, we're going to see how GL.iNet has evolved their routers to keep pace with new technologies while delivering on those qualities. Welcome back to Dev Odyssey, a developer's journey through IT, where I cover tutorials and reviews of IT tools and technologies. I'm your host, Orest, and in this episode, we're reviewing the Beryl AX. This is not my first time using GL.iNet products. They sent me a GL AR750S or Slate a couple years back, where I reviewed their router interface based on OpenWRT. I enjoy this pocket-sized router and take it with me while on the move. But times have changed, technology has innovated, and so has GL.iNet. They sent me a Beryl AX to review, and I figured going through the differences between the two, hardware, software, and performance, would be a great way to see how GL.iNet continues to stay competitive with consumer-grade networking. Before I continue, GL.iNet does have a newer version of the Slate AX. While a comparison between these products within the same product line would make more sense, I simply have to go with what I received, so this will be a take between two different product lines and different generations. As the Slate is currently end-of-life and discontinued, I will not be suggesting you purchase the Slate, but rather showing the evolution of technological capabilities and performance, from hardware to software, and my overall opinion of the Beryl AX. And finally, I'd like to thank them for the opportunity to use the Beryl AX and share my experience with my audience. Let's get down to business. So how are the Beryl AX and the Slate physically different? For starters, they're different in size. The Beryl AX is larger as it has active cooling, as opposed to the passive cooling that the Slate has. This is surely because the internals of the Beryl AX are beefier in order to support higher throughput and likely to heat up more quickly. Therefore, the fan helps it stay cooler and be more performant under load. As for aesthetics, the form factor is effectively the same. The two antennas on the sides swivel up and down in the same manner and have the same similar shape. The only differences are the color, texture, and curvature. The Beryl AX is a light gray, while the Slate is a much darker gray. My color preferences are generally darker, but in this case I prefer the Beryl AX. For texture, the Beryl AX feels just a bit smoother than the Slate, with just a slight shine, but they both definitely have a matte finish. For the curvature, while they are both rectangular, the Slate has pronounced edges, while the Beryl has more rounded edges. Overall, GL.iNet team has done a great job of improving the aesthetics. Other than aesthetics, they differ mostly in hardware. The Beryl AX is a Wi-Fi 6 first router with theoretical speeds of 574 megabits per second on the 2.4 GHz band and 2,402 megabits per second on the 5 GHz band. To meet the increased throughput, it rocks a MT7981B 1.3 GHz dual-core processor with 512 megabytes of DDR4 RAM. On the back, we see two Ethernet ports, a 2.5 gigabit WAN, and 1 gigabit LAN. In addition, there's a USB 3 port useful for file sharing, tethering, or USB cellular modules. There's a USB-C port for power, drawing 5 volts and 3 amps, and on the side, a router reset button and a customizable switch. You'll also notice plenty of slits for ventilation and some rubber feet on the bottom with your generic labeling on hardware and getting started information. The Slate is a Wi-Fi 5 router with theoretical speeds of 300 megabits per second on the 2.4 GHz band and 433 megabits per second on the 5 GHz band. The brains behind this router is a 775 MHz QCA 9563 SoC with 128 megabytes of DDR2 RAM. On the back, we have 3 Ethernet ports, 1 for WAN, 2 for LAN, all rated for 1 gigabit per second. We also see a USB 2 port and a micro USB port for power with a 5-volt, 2-amp draw. I will say the USB port on the Slate looks like a USB 1 port given the white color. However, the color standard is not often followed, and their documentation states it's a USB 2 port, so I'd assume the color is simply wrong. This port is also used for the same benefits noted above with the Beryl AX. On the sides, we have the same reset button and customizable switch. However, we also have a micro SD slot on the other side, which is notably missing from the Beryl AX. This lets us expand the storage of our router without having to use the USB port to not only create SMB shares, but also to download more plugins and extend the functionality of the router. Lastly, on the bottom, we have the same type of ventilation and generic labeling on the hardware and connection information. With a general review of the hardware out of the way, we can now dive into the performance of these routers. This is my first time doing a performance-related video, let alone for a router, so if you like what you see, give this video a like. In particular, I covered 3 different performance tests: iperf, Speedtest, and SMB. To run these performance tests, I used my M1 Max MacBook Pro and a 2.5 gigabit Anker USB-C Ethernet adapter with a Realtek RTL8156 chipset. This hardware ensured I have enough horsepower to test the Wi-Fi 6 abilities of the Beryl AX, but also its 2.5 gigabit WAN port. Starting off with iperf, I wanted to see the speeds I'd get on the Beryl AX with its 2.5 gigabit WAN Ethernet port. So I quickly changed it to a LAN port, downloaded iperf 3 package on the router, and put it in server mode. For the connect test, I was basically able to saturate the link with an average of 2.23 gigabits per second, or 2,230 megabits per second. For the reverse test, it was 100 megabits faster, with a speed of 2.33 gigabits per second. In comparison to the Slate, over a 1 gigabit WAN port, I certainly did not get near saturating the link at an average of 215 megabits per second connect and 83.6 megabits per second in reverse. It was likely hardware throttled at this point. Over Wi-Fi, we clearly see a decrease in speeds, both connect and reverse, for both the Beryl AX and the Slate. However, we can see Wi-Fi 6 at work for the Beryl AX, getting 540 megabits per second connect and 772 megabits per second in reverse. For the Slate, the drop wasn't as significant as the Beryl AX, only decreasing by 5% for the connect and 30% for reverse. Lastly, when moving 15 feet away from the routers, we can see the drop in performance even more. As expected, both connect and reverse speeds taking a bigger hit. The Beryl AX performs better here, not just because it's Wi-Fi 6, but also a feature called dynamic frequency scanning that allows it to find less occupied channels within those ranges and utilize those to broadcast its signal and therefore improve bandwidth. To finish off iperf testing, I performed a bidirectional test to see if I can get full duplex speeds, at least for the 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port. My understanding of full duplex would be full down and full up speed simultaneously, which would be 2.5 gigabits per second for both. When running that test, I sadly did not see that. Rather, I saw 1.58 gigabits per second transfer and 1.26 gigabits per second receive. To round out my testing, I did the same test with the Slate, wired and then over Wi-Fi close range and a distance. The results were as expected, with speeds dropping when going over Wi-Fi and then at a distance for both transfer and receive. However, the transfer speed for the Slate seemed to increase instead of decrease when moving to Wi-Fi and over distance. I can't really explain why that happened, and it seems like an anomaly to me, especially in my home where it's congested with Wi-Fi signals from multiple access points. Getting back to my saturated full duplex testing over Ethernet, I did some research here, and I was told from a network engineer colleague of mine to try multi-stream to see if that would help me saturate the link. What this would do is create more iperf 3 processes on the client, running on different source ports, to see if the link could be saturated that way. So I gave it a shot, with 3 streams running simultaneously. Looking at the results, I saw it still did not saturate the link. Actually, I saw a decrease in transfer and receive speeds. For the Beryl AX, the transfer speed was 1.52 gigabits per second, and the receive speed was 963 megabits per second. For the Slate, I saw a decrease in transfer speed and actually an increase in receive speeds, which seems anomalous to me. I likely already saturated the link as much as possible for the Beryl AX CPU, and therefore no additional streams would increase the link saturation. Moving on, everyone loves a great speed test, right? Naturally, I had to test that with a few different configurations. First, I tested a wired WAN connection, then wireless WAN, then VPN over wired WAN, and then tethered WAN. Within those tests, I also tested wired LAN, Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi at a distance. Looking at the test results head-to-head between the routers, we clearly see the best speeds with a wired WAN and a wired LAN, with the Beryl AX reaching 408 megabits per second down and 50 megabits per second up, while the Slate I saw 255 megabits per second down and 46 megabits per second up. I have cable internet and clearly do not get matching download and upload speeds, which makes me sad.
It makes me feel sad.
But nonetheless, we see the routers perform well here, as I pay for 500 megabits per second down. We can see the improvements in the down speed on the Beryl AX, likely due to the 2.5 gigabit WAN port and more powerful processing hardware, when compared to the 1 gigabit port on the Slate and a slower CPU. Upspeed is roughly the same, and I would simply attribute it to reaching my ISP limitations. So clearly, this is the most ideal connection scenario. The more likely scenario, however, being a pocket-sized travel router, is a wireless WAN scenario. As for the LAN side, I personally like to hardline in, but I'm sure you'll connect other devices to it over Wi-Fi. Given that, we saw a very decent speed of 172 megabits per second down and 34 megabits per second up for the Beryl AX with a wired LAN. We see that downspeed quickly drop to 52 megabits per second when going over wireless LAN or Wi-Fi. For the Slate, we see a similar trend, with the downspeed dropping almost in half from 61 to 35 megabits per second. However, for the upspeed, we see an increase from 20 to 28 megabits per second, which again is anomalous. After completing some baseline ISP speed tests, I connected my routers to Mulvad's VPN service and did some tests there. These tests were only done with wired WAN and wired LAN, as any other configuration should simply be slower. While I didn't reach the theoretical max VPN speeds advertised by GL.iNet, my results did match their trends. WireGuard speeds were faster than OpenVPN speeds. Using the same VPN endpoint server in Dallas, Texas, my WireGuard downspeed for the Beryl AX and the Slate were 195 and 54 megabits per second, respectively. The upspeeds for the Beryl AX and the Slate were 47 and 42 megabits per second, respectively. Relative to my ISP speed tests, the Beryl AX held out pretty well. The Slate certainly saw a significant decrease in downspeed. However, between the two routers, the upspeeds only differed by 5 megabits per second, both close to the max upspeed provided by my ISP, which is likely 50 megabits per second. With OpenVPN, the results fared much better for the Beryl AX when compared to the Slate. The downspeeds were 126 and 11 megabits per second for the Beryl AX and the Slate, respectively. The upspeeds were 44 and 12 megabits per second for the Beryl AX and the Slate, respectively. You can clearly see the improvements in OpenVPN speeds with the Beryl AX hardware and software, where it's basically unusable for the Slate. Comparing these VPN speeds to GL.iNet reported speeds, WireGuard downspeed was only off by roughly 100 megabits per second, and OpenVPN downspeed was only off by roughly 30 megabits per second. Pretty close to maxing out the OpenVPN connection, and overall decently fast for both. To round out the speed test, I plugged in my phone to the USB port, turned on tethering on my phone, pressed the connect button, and let it rip. For this test, I used only a wired LAN connection between the router and my computer, and my cell phone with a 5G cellular connection with Verizon's network. Downspeeds for the Beryl AX and the Slate were 158 and 59 megabits per second, while upspeeds for the Beryl AX and the Slate were 12 and 46 megabits per second. As expected, the downspeeds were in line with what you'd think. The USB 3 port and the CPU on the Beryl AX can handle faster speeds available via 5G, while the Slate simply could not with a USB 2.0 port and a slower CPU. It was surprising to see how slow the upspeed was for the Beryl AX and how much faster it was for the Slate, with a difference of 34 megabits per second. The only difference between these tests were the endpoint servers, as these tests were conducted roughly at the same time, in the early morning during a weekday. I did additional testing later on, this time using the same endpoint server, only to see the results were even worse. While the downspeeds stayed roughly the same, upspeeds were slower. This was likely due to the time the tests were conducted, on the weekend during the afternoon, when the network was likely more congested. Therefore, I disregarded those additional results, attributing them to cellular network issues and not the hardware. I made the same conclusion for my initial tests with the Beryl AX. Lastly, let's briefly touch on file sharing tests over SMB. I went into the console and switched on SMB. For the Beryl AX, I created a SMB user, while for the Slate, I didn't have that option, likely because the stock firmware on the Slate is older than the stock firmware on the Beryl AX. For this test, I used a Samsung T7 hard drive with a USB 3.2 port. To perform the test, I transferred a 5 GB file for the Beryl AX and a 1 GB file for the Slate, so I could get ample transfer time to get a good average. Let's just say transferring a 5 GB file with the Slate would have taken forever. Anyway, we see the Beryl AX way outperformed the Slate, expectedly so. The fastest speed was over 2.5 gigabit Ethernet for the Beryl AX at 37 megabytes per second, and the slowest was over Wi-Fi at a distance of 15 feet for the Slate at 3 megabytes per second. Even the slowest speed for the Beryl AX over Wi-Fi at 15 feet, being 15 megabytes per second, was faster than the fastest speed over Ethernet for the Slate at 5 megabytes per second. As you can see on the graph, the speeds differed greatly for a couple of reasons. First reason is the Slate has a USB 2.0 port, while the Beryl AX has a USB 3.0 port. Clearly, the higher rated speeds were made of use here. But also, and significantly, I noticed the Beryl AX uses SMB3, while the Slate used SMB1. SMB3 is not only much faster than SMB1, but also way more secure. Given that criteria, the results made sense. The Beryl AX speeds are pretty good. I'd use it for basic file sharing among clients on the network, but nothing more heavy duty, like video editing. Overall, we can see how much has improved with the Beryl AX versus Slate. While we see a slight increase in size, it ultimately does not affect its portability. For that trade-off in size, we get a ton more performance that anyone would accept. Not only do we get performance improvements, but also security improvements with WPA3 as the standard security protocol for Wi-Fi 6, improving encryption and protection of our data over the air. Just a note on performance and security expectations when using this device in public. What we experience will vary depending on our configurations and what's available around us. So if we use a Beryl AX to connect to a hotel Wi-Fi, we will be limited by that hotel's Wi-Fi performance and security, at least when it comes to outbound internet access. It's worth noting this to understand the interdependence of connected, untrusted devices and performance and security expectations. The focus of this video was definitely performance, but there are great features I did not cover, available in the Beryl AX and its version of GL.iNet Admin software. Along with its VPN configurations, we can now do split tunneling, giving us control of what websites we want to connect over the VPN and ones we don't. If you want to use multiple WAN configurations, say Wi-Fi WAN and tethering, you can use multi-WAN for load balancing internet connections or failover, just in case your primary internet goes down. And as with the Slate, you can use this router as an access point or a Wi-Fi extender for an existing network and configure the side toggle button to turn off or on VPN, Tor, or AdGuard configurations. Given everything I covered, I resoundingly recommend the Beryl AX router. GL.iNet continues to pave the way to empower the regular user with advanced features provided by the OpenWRT backbone to the regular consumer while keeping up with its improvements in networking technology and bandwidth. At a price of $99, you're getting a pocket-sized router that will pack a punch wherever you take it. Finally, not to forget my OpenWRT fans. If you have a Slate, just because it's end of life doesn't mean it's trash. I advocate against e-waste, and this router is still a useful machine. You can update it to the latest GL.iNet software version at the cost of losing file sharing. But for those power users who want the cleanest Slate, you can flash the latest version of plain OpenWRT, which, as of this recording, is 23.05, and customize it until your heart's content. Either way, you can breathe new life into aging hardware. Thanks for following me in my journey. I really appreciate it. If you got some value out of this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if you like this type of content and other content around IT technologies, networking, security, and more, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and click that bell for notifications so you don't miss the next video. Would you get a Beryl AX travel router? If so, what would you use it for? drop me a comment below and we'll discuss it. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.